Lori, thanks very much. I'm joined here at the White House by Dr. Larry Summers, the Director of the National Economic Council. As always, appreciate the time.
Good to be with you, Peter.
You just took part in this meeting with the congressional Republicans and Democrats over the couple of issues, but a jobs bill seemed to be at the top of that list. You left that meeting any more optimistic that Republicans and Democrats can agree on something with you all?
I think there's a common commitment around priorities the president has been emphasizing. Small business, a major engine of recovery, tax relief for small business, steps that will increase the flow of credit to small business, infrastructure, energy. There's going to be a great deal of activity, and I'm optimistic that we'll see a jobs bill because that's something we all ought to be able to agree on, that while the economy's made some progress in recent months, we've got a long way to go.
How big should that jobs bill be? When the president asks you, Larry Summers, listen, given the state of the economy, the state of the deficit right now, what can we afford right now?
I'll tell you, I worry much more, Peter, about our doing too little than I do about our doing too much. And, of course, we've got ways of paying over time for the steps that are taken to increase jobs. What's really important is that we get started on small business. What's really important is that we get started on infrastructure, doing more as quickly as we can.
The House bill that passed in December, $154 billion. Is that the right kind of?
I think the House bill was a strong measure, and we look forward to the deliberations in the Senate. There are issues of tax provisions that will need to be extended before too long. Measures from the Recovery Act. There are issues that the president has stressed of energy efficiency, where we're eager to see legislative action as quickly as we can. You know, entirely apart from the employment aspects. Some of the highest return investments that can be made in our country are energy efficiency. You see it, and you think about it, especially when you have weather like the weather we're having in Washington right now. Better energy efficiency can produce payback periods of 3 or 5 years, and we've got to find ways to make sure those investments are getting made, both for the jobs they generate and for the stronger economy and reduced oil dependence that result.
What about the state of the economy right now? You and I have talked about the debate over the new normal, if there's a new normal. We saw that GDP number, 5.7% in the last quarter. Have you won that argument? Is the new normal now old news?
Well, I don't know about that concept particularly. Here's what I do know. Economy was on the brink of depression. It isn't any longer. I described it a week or so ago as a statistical recovery, but a human recession. We're seeing output starting to increase, and there's always a sequence. First, you see output increase. We've seen that. Then you start to see the number of hours that workers who have jobs work stabilize or start to rise. We've seen that. Then you'll see employment increase, and ultimately you'll see unemployment move down. And we're moving forward on that progression. Didn't just happen by accident. It happened because there have been strong policies in place to contain the economic downturn over the last year.
That 9.7% unemployment rate we saw last Friday, has that altered in any way your assessment, your outlook for unemployment this year?
Well, it certainly has to be for all of us who are concerned about unemployment. That statistic and the household survey, which showed very substantial in the survey of people as distinct from the survey of businesses, showed significant increases in work, particularly in work in the private sector. That has to be an encouraging feature. But these numbers fluctuate from month to month. I think we have a basis for saying that we're really in a very different place than we were a year ago or even 6 months ago when the economy was losing hundreds of thousands of jobs per month. But equally, and that's why I emphasize that it's a human recession, we've got a long way to go. These problems weren't made in a month or a year. They're not going to be fixed in a month or a year, and we just have to keep taking the steps, helping businesses, helping small businesses get the credit they need, helping large businesses get the export access, as well as the small businesses that they need by enforcing our trade agreements, by getting rid of controls that no longer should be on U.S. exports, helping businesses, making sure government does the things that it can. It's something we're going to need to work on for years going forward, but there isn't any alternative.
Let me ask you about what's happening overseas right now. How worried are you about the concerns about the sovereign debt over in Europe, and how confident are you that the Europeans are going to solve those problems?
Secretary Geithner, as Treasury Secretary, speaks to those kinds of financial issues. He met with his European counterparts this weekend in Canada and underscored our concern and received their reassurance that they were very much focused on this set of issues.
And for those on Wall Street or even here in Washington suggest that's a sign of things to come here in this country because of our deficit situation. We had Morgan Stanley economist David Greenlaw say he's worried about a surge in long-term rates, 10-year treasuries, perhaps the end of this year, 5.5%, mortgage rates as high as 8% because of the deficit situation. Is there a risk of that?
People are always making forecasts. I'll tell you what's really important. What's really important is that we show as a country that we are committed to bringing this deficit down. That's why one of the important topics for the president with the congressional leadership was the bipartisan commission on the model of the proposal of Senator Conrad and Gregg, in which all of these issues would be on the table and in which you'd have an opportunity outside of the ordinary political process to put together a powerful compromise. I think that in the end, we as a country do the right thing, and I have no doubt that that's what will happen with respect to the budget. And the president's proposals, whether it's the largest set of measures to contain health care costs in his health care legislation, whether it's for the first time a 3-year budget freeze on discretionary spending in his proposal, whether it's the various efficiencies that each of his cabinet members are seeking as they go through their budgets line by line. The president's concrete actions are showing the way. The scope for this commission is to take further steps as they're necessary, and all of that will get us to the kind of path we need to be.
Let me end quickly, if I could, on regulatory reform. One issue in particular that I'm not sure you've been asked about. Right now, we've got perhaps an impasse over on the Senate side on regulatory reform, but one idea that did pass in the House is this idea of Congress being able to audit Fed monetary policy decisions. As the president's chief economic advisor, would you recommend to the president that if any legislation lands on his desk that includes that power, that he should veto it?
Fed's made clear its commitment to transparency, and we support what's necessary for the Fed to be transparent. At the same time, the basic independence of the Federal Reserve to deliberate on monetary policy, to come forth with a monetary policy, is a central feature of how our economic system works. And a great deal of research demonstrates that an independent Federal Reserve is really crucial, not just if we're to avoid inflation, but also if we're to keep interest rates down over time and to maximize growth in employment. So what we'll be working to support is Federal Reserve independence, but of course Federal Reserve independence with transparency and with people able to see that money's being handled properly.
Does that legislation cross that line in your view?
I think I just answered your question, Peter.
All right. Larry Summers, as always, we appreciate you joining us here on Bloomberg. Busy day here at the White House, snowy day here at the White House.